All right, so last few days we talked about cell theory, okay? And of course the cell theory is important because it tells us that all living things are made up of cells. Tells that cells carry out the basic functions and that they reproduce by dividing. So what we need to start looking at now are the specifics of point number 2. And that is that cells carry out the basic functions, okay? What we want to look at is what are some of those basic functions and how do they do that? What structures are required for that kind of, or for those kind of basic functions to be carried out? So by the end of the day today, if we have enough time, because it's a short class, we may be labeling cell diagrams by the end of the day, I hope. Okay, it'll depend what they look like. Our color copier is down, and I had to photocopy them in grayscale. I don't know if they're going to look good enough to label or not. Okay, we'll do our best with that. All right, so what we need to do is know and understand how plant and animal cells are different. Okay, we talked about how they're similar. They have similar structures. They have similar processes. But obviously, there are a few major differences. Okay, those major differences, okay, are the other part of what our other key point here is why are those major differences present? Okay, well, those major differences are present because of how plants and animals get their fuel. Okay, the fuel for all living things is glucose. Okay, some way they have got to be able to turn organic material into glucose for fuel, because once we get to that point, everything is the same for plants and animals. They have the same cellular structures that break down glucose and release its energy, okay, and allow that to power the other cellular processes that go on. How do plants get their glucose? Okay, what process? Photosynthesis. Okay, so plants use photosynthesis. That means they've got to be able to collect sunlight. They've got to be able to collect carbon dioxide. They've got to be able to collect water. Okay, those are the basic things necessary, okay, for photosynthesis to occur. Obviously, there are other things that plants require, but those are the basics for photosynthesis. How do animals get their glucose? Okay, Carson. Okay, some organisms would eat decaying matter, okay, and some would eat live plants or animals. Essentially, anything that is not a plant has to consume organic material for food, right, and then break it down into glucose. Because really, what are we made out of? Well, we're made out of things that can very easily be turned into food. Okay, we're made out of sugars, starches, proteins, fats. Okay, all of those things, we have cellular structures that can break them down and turn them into glucose. Okay, some are more efficient than others. Okay, what thing do we eat that you can think of that is most easily turned into glucose? Sugars are what kind of food? Carbs, right. Okay, the carbs are the things that we can most quickly turn into sugar. Okay, because sugar is a carb. Okay, it's a carbohydrate. So we call them carbohydrates because they contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Carbohydrates. Okay, so that's why they have them. So the things that we consume that would have carbohydrates, like potatoes and rice and bread and grains and things like that. Okay, because they're plant material. Okay, they're made mostly of plant material, and plants take sunlight and turn it into glucose and starch and things like that. Okay, so that's where we get that energy from. Now, if you eat things that cast a shadow and move, okay, then you're not a vegetarian, and you eat the flesh of other animals, okay, and that also contains proteins, contains carbohydrates, and it contains fats. Okay, now, can you get fats from plant materials? Absolutely. Okay, if you've ever used olive oil, canola oil, coconut oil, okay, those all come from plants, okay, and they're all fats. Okay, plants do make fats. And they use those, obviously, for storage, a little bit of energy, although plants usually use starch as an energy storage. Okay? But in fruit, okay, they use sugar to store energy and things like that. Okay. These three words are crucially important. They are the reason plant cells and animal cells have differences. Their modes of nutrition are different. That is, how they get their glucose is different. How you get your glucose is your mode of nutrition. Too far. Oh, okay. Okay, so there's lots of subtle differences, and all of those have to do with the collection and processing of energy, okay, till it gets to the form of glucose. So if you're an animal, you chew on other organisms, plants or animals, depending on your choices. If you're a person, that's your choice, okay? If you're, an animal in the wild, well, that's where you are on the food chain, okay? I have not seen very many vegetarian lions, right? They don't really have that option, okay? Could an animal, like, could you feed a lion a vegetarian diet? No, you couldn't. They would die. Okay, yeah, they would, right? Most carnivores do not produce enzymes that are capable of breaking down plant material into sugars. Okay, omnivores like ourselves, we have some. Okay, we have some enzymes that can break down certain plant materials and turn them into energy. Right, but if you or I eat grass, okay, leaves, okay, things like that, essentially the green parts of most plants, we don't get a heck of a lot of energy out of that. Okay, there are some parts of it that we can digest and break down into carbohydrates and sugar, but a lot of it we can't, because plants are made of cellulose. Okay, a lot of that stuff that's called fiber, okay, if you've heard of that term before, cellulose fiber is what plants are made out of. Their cell walls are made out of it, things like that. We don't have any enzymes capable of breaking down cellulose. So it goes through us pretty much unchanged. That's why fiber is good for your digestive tract. Okay? It acts kind of like a brush. Okay, you eat a piece of broccoli, or you eat some celery, okay, something like that. Okay, corn, all right, things like that. They go through you, and you don't get a lot out of them. Okay, so they come out of you kind of unchanged. I know that's a little bit gross, but that's what happens. You feed that to a cow, okay, or any other kind of herbivore, they have enzymes capable of breaking down cellulose and turning it into energy. But their digestive system is a bit different than ours. Okay, most herbivores or bovines have a 4-chambered stomach. We have a 1-chambered stomach, okay? But bovines have a 4-chambered stomach. So they have several digestive processes that go on in there. Okay? They eat the grass, and then it gets partially digested, and then what do? Yeah, they throw it up and chew it again. Have you ever seen a cow chewing their cud? Okay, that's what they're doing. They barfed up some of the grass they ate, okay, and chewed it again, and then swallowed, and it goes through the tract a second time, and then they can break down the cellulose in it. Okay, yeah, that's why cows are gross. Okay, like, don't ever smell a cow's breath. It smells like rotting grass, because that's what they just barfed up and chewed again. Okay, it's pretty disgusting, right? Yeah. Anybody in here vegan? I don't want to insult anyone, but I do sometimes. I eat meat. Okay. I'm not ashamed of that. So, okay. If you're a plant, obviously you stay in one place. Okay. This is not the Lord of the Rings. Okay. Treebeard doesn't just uproot himself and walk around and do stuff. Okay. Plants are rooted to one location for life. Okay. They cannot move around and seek food. So they've got to be able to turn the stuff they can access from a stationary position into food. Carbon dioxide they can take from the air. Water they can take from the ground. Sunlight obviously they get from the sun. Even on a cloudy day they can still carry out some photosynthesis. Right? Everybody following me on that one? So, how many people have heard that if you talk to your plant it grows better? And it's true. Okay? They've done lots of studies on that. Talking to your plant will make it grow better, because what are you giving it? CO2. You're exhaling nice, warm, moist carbon dioxide right onto their leaves, okay, where they absorb it and change it into glucose. Okay, so if you talk to your plant, people will think you're crazy, okay, but you're not. You're only crazy if the plant talks back. Okay. Yeah, breathing on it is the same. Okay, I actually had someone say, well, does it matter how you talk to your plant? And I was like, now that's an interesting experiment. Somebody should really do that sometime. Okay? Talk nicely to it, talk loud to it, speak abusively to it, and see what happens, see if it makes any difference. I'm sure it doesn't make any difference. Okay? Plants don't have the ability to, sense their environment. They just get carbon dioxide. So if you shout it at a plant, maybe it would even grow better because you're forcefully exhaling carbon dioxide. I don't know. Okay? But as long as they have that, they're capable of doing what they need to do. Some of their structures, though, are not related so much to acquiring the glucose as they are to acquiring the sunlight. Okay? If a plant is in a forest, is it better to be tall or short? Tall. Well, then you've got to be able to support the growth that you need. Okay? Not all plants are capable of growing tall. Okay? These plants here are not capable of growing very tall. That's why they hang down. Okay? They don't have certain chemicals within their cell walls that make them strong enough to support a lot of vertical growth. Whereas, okay, the dragon palm there, the tall one on the window, okay, that one has the ability to support tall growth. Okay? It has a like wood-like hard central stem, okay, or a trunk, right? If you look at those other palms there, okay, I've got like 3 or 4 of them there, those are not very strong, right? They can only grow so tall before they just fall over. That's why half of them have a big stick, okay, in the pot that they're tied to, because they don't have the ability to grow very tall, okay, before they fall over. So if plants are going to compete for light, then they need to have the ability to support that kind of growth. Everybody follow me there? That's why you never see any 6-foot moss, okay? Because it's just not capable of doing that. All right? So there's all kinds of things within the cells, even at a cellular level, that enable that kind of stuff to take place. Right? If you're an animal, you got to be able to move around. Plants generally are pretty rigid. Their cells have a pretty specific shape, okay, that enables them to be kind of stiff and then grow tall. Whereas if you are like stiff all over as an animal, well, it's going to be pretty difficult to walk. It's going to be difficult to move around. Okay, that's not going to work very well for you. Okay, so we need to be flexible. That's why our cells don't have cell walls. Okay, they only have a membrane because they need to be pliable. They've got to be flexible. They've got to be able to twist and bend and stretch, okay, as we move around. Right? So that's another difference in structure. So not so much related directly to how we get our energy, but kind of indirectly related to that. All right. If you are a chemo heterotroph, big long word that you need to know, okay? If you are a chemo heterotroph, you get organic chemicals from other organisms. Technically broken down, chemical other feeder, okay, is what chemo heterotroph means. Okay? Chemicals from other organisms to feed yourself, chemo heterotroph. Okay? All your animals are chemo heterotrophs. Fungi are chemo heterotrophs. Okay? They digest the organic material from either living or dead organisms, depending on the kind of fungus, in order to get energy. Okay? So if you've ever seen, mushrooms growing in the wild, they're growing on the decaying plant material that is present on or underneath the ground. If you have athlete's foot, you have a parasitic fungus that is eating you. That's why it's itchy. Okay? Because what a fungus does is they have things that, if you look at them under a microscope, look like roots. They look like roots. They're not, but they look like that. And they're called hyphae. Okay? So they get all these little kind of protrusions, and what happens with these protrusions is they secrete digestive enzymes, very much like what's in our stomach, but they secrete it on the outside. And that digests the tissue around this little thing called a hyphae. Okay? And then once that tissue is digested, they absorb it through their cell membranes. Okay? So it's like our digestion, except their digestion is external. Okay? It would be like if you threw up all your stomach acid, everything digested the food on your plate that way and then ate it. Okay? It's external digestion as opposed to internal digestion. I know that's really gross, but okay? A fungus essentially digests its food outside its body and then absorbs the nutrients. But that's why athlete's foot is itchy. It's literally eating you. Okay? Yeah, it's digesting your tissue on your feet. Okay? You also have a fungus that grows on your scalp. Okay? If it gets out of control, the skin dies and flakes away, and you get dandruff. Right? It's actually a very similar fungus to athlete's foot. So, yeah, and it's, you know what? Those kind of things are present on our body all the time. How many of you are like desperately wanting to scratch right now? Because some people get like that when you talk about stuff like that. They get all creeped out. Okay. So chemoheterotrophs have to consume chemicals from other organisms to make energy. So their cells need a few special structures. Lysosomes, okay, and they also don't have cell walls, with the exception of fungus. Fungi actually do have cell walls, but they're not like plant cell walls. Okay? But all the mobile chemoheterotrophs, they only have a cell membrane to increase their mobility. Okay. Questions on the chemoheterotrophs? Yeah. Because it's a chemo heterotroph. It eats other things. Yeah? Okay? And worms eat other things, right? They eat dirt and the organic material in the dirt. Okay? Fungus, like we said, breaks down the dead material in the dirt. So, all right. So within an animal cell, okay, this is our kind of stereotypical animal cell. The things that are unique to animal cells are, okay, peroxisomes, okay, and lysosomes, which oddly enough is not on here, but a peroxisome and a lysosome are very similar. Oh, sorry, there's lysosome right there. Okay, peroxisomes are lysosomes with no food in them yet. Right? So a peroxisome gets produced actually by this thing, the Golgi apparatus, okay? And then it kind of floats about in the cytoplasm, that's the fluid inside the cell, until food particles merge with it, and then it becomes a lysosome because digestion is taking place. Okay? So peroxisomes are empty lysosomes with no food in them. Lysosomes, that's where digestion really takes place. Okay. Other things that are going to be kind of unique to animal cells would be this cytoskeleton, or at least for the most part, that's unique. Some plant cells have it, but for the most part, they don't. And that cytoskeleton really is little fibers that attach to two different sides of the cell. And what that allows you to do is they're kind of elastic. So it can allow the cell to change shape, but not extremely so that it doesn't rupture. Right? So they allow for flexibility, but to also be sturdy at the same time. All right, so they have to be somewhat plastic, okay? Animal cells have to be somewhat plastic, that is able to change shape, okay, because animals are often mobile, okay? And they often contain fibrous materials that allow the cell to change shape, okay? We have a lot of fibrous material in our bodies. That's what our muscles are made out of, okay? So if you were looking at a muscle cell, it would have way more fibers in it than, let's say, a cell of your intestine. Okay? Because a cell of your intestine doesn't need to worry about contracting and exerting a lot of force, a little bit, but not a lot, just enough to squeeze food through. Okay? Not like a skeletal muscle or your heart muscle or something like that. Okay? They would have a lot more fibers. Okay, and they have only a flexible membrane as their outer border. In other words, no wall. All right, questions on the chemo heterotrophs? All right, if you are photosynthetic, all right, and I'm not saying plants because we could be talking about single-celled organisms and even blue-green algae and things like that that are not true plants. Okay, if you're photosynthetic, you are a photoautotroph. So you are light self-feeding. Okay, you feed yourself using light. So plant cells produce their own food by capturing sunlight and using its power to remove carbon dioxide to produce sugar for energy by photosynthesis. Okay, so those are photoautotrophs. Okay, we're going to talk about the structure of the leaf a little bit later on in this unit when we start talking about multicellular organisms, and we'll see all the specialized cells that are in the leaf that help carry out that process. Okay, and then obviously we've got what's called the carbon cycle here, okay, that is showing where essentially all of the or how one group of animals or organisms is helping another. So if we've got our autotrophs here, our plants essentially, okay, they take carbon dioxide and water and they turn it into organic compounds. So that's this kind of green arrow here, okay, that's making these organic compounds like sugars and things like that. We take those organic compounds and oxygen and we make glucose out of them and we exhale carbon dioxide and water, the raw materials that these things need. Okay, it's a nice little relationship. Okay, they make food for us, we make food for them, everybody's happy. Okay, now this process of photosynthesis looks like this. Sorry, I've got that backwards. Okay, so this is the process that goes on in our body. This is cellular respiration, which you'll learn a lot about in the first unit of Bio 20. Okay, this is cellular respiration. We take glucose, C6H12O6, react it with oxygen, and that produces carbon dioxide and water. What kind of reaction is that? It's a combustion reaction. That's why we say you're burning sugar, you're burning calories, right? You literally are. There's no fire inside your cell, but okay, that's essentially what's going on. All right, plants, they do the opposite. They take CO2 and water, okay, with some light, and they make C6H12O6 and oxygen gas. Okay, the reaction in reverse. Okay, so this one here is photosynthesis. Okay, so remember how we said chemical reactions or chemical changes are not reversible? They're not, unless you have a lot of energy that you can take those raw materials, add some energy, and get their stability back. Okay, glucose is stable as long as it doesn't interact with oxygen. We make it interact with oxygen and we allow it to release all the energy it has. Well, if you take these materials, put that energy back, you can get back the glucose and oxygen. Okay? And that's the carbon cycle. That's what plants and animals are always doing. Okay, anybody need that one anymore? All right, so what are some structures that a plant cell is going to have that an animal cell won't? Cell wall. Okay, cell wall is there to support the cell. That's what it allows a plant to kind of get tall to an extent. Okay, not very tall, but at least support itself and get into the sunlight. Cell walls allow that. They're made of cellulose, that stuff we talked about that we can't digest. Okay, and that allows for a certain amount of support. Well, we have a cell membrane too. All cells have a membrane. Okay, ours have a membrane, theirs have a membrane, and they're basically identical. Chloroplasts, okay, the things that carry out photosynthesis, that have the chlorophyll in them. We don't have those. Okay, if we did, and we started to get hungry, all you have to do is walk out into the sun, or get underneath the lights. Right? Oh man, I need a snack. Okay, and then you wouldn't be hungry anymore. Well, yeah, it doesn't work that way, obviously. Okay, it's not like photosynthesis, guys. It can make energy, but it's a slow process. How much energy do we as a moving organism consume in a day? A lot, okay? Way more than a plant of equal size could probably hope to produce by sitting still and carrying out photosynthesis. Movement, mobility, is an energy-intensive activity, all right? Bare minimum calorie count for an adult person is around 1,400 calories, 1,400 joules in a day, all right? And that's like basically just to stay alive, right? If you want to do anything or anything like that, you've got to consume more than that. You guys, as teenagers, probably consume well over 2,500 calories a day, right? Someone who's, let's say, like a professional athlete or something like that, who has a lot of training in a day, okay, has a lot of muscle repair to do every night when they go to sleep, okay, they may consume 8,000 calories a day, okay? So it's energy intensive, okay? We use a lot of energy as animals, but that's okay. There's fewer of us than there are of plants. There's always going to be more plants, okay? There has to be. If there isn't, the food chains will all break down and okay, everything will starve, right? That's not good. All right, so big things here, okay? They have specialized organelles called chloroplasts. Without those, we don't carry out photosynthesis, okay? They're the photosynthetic organ of the plant. Okay, plants have to support long stems as well as leaves. So to do this, they have cell walls and large vacuoles filled with water. Okay, now, unfortunately, I did just water all my plants. Wasn't thinking. Usually I kind of forget about them around the middle of the chemistry unit so that they get all wilted looking. Okay, and then I can show you, this is what happens when a plant doesn't have enough water to support itself, except that mine all look nice and healthy right now because they all have enough water to support themselves. Okay, you can see that the leaves are upright. Okay, they're supporting themselves, they're not droopy. Okay, this one here, I mean, yes, this is just kind of the way this one grows, but the leaves are firm. Okay, they're not like flaccid. Okay, they're all upright, they're all supporting themselves. Okay, things like that. When these get dry, when they get kind of not dry but wilted, okay, what's happening there is, to survive, the plant empties water out of this special water vacuole structure that plant cells have. Okay? Now, it doesn't do that consciously. What happens is, as water is removed from all the other parts of the cell, salt concentrations increase inside the cell, and a process called osmosis that we'll talk about later begins to suck the water out of here. Okay? When the water comes out of here, the pressure that this organelle exerts on the rest of the cell disappears, and the cell will collapse. Okay? It'll come back, but for a while, it won't be able to support the cell walls, and it'll just fold over. That's what happens when a plant looks kind of sick or wilted. Okay? It's because the water in these vacuoles is starting to run out, and it's not pushing on the walls enough to support the plant anymore. Now, if you are a big, tall tree, you don't worry about that quite as much because you have a trunk. Okay? What's that? Well, not so much a lot of them. In fact, a plant that has a trunk, so it can make like wood, then it doesn't worry so much about the pressure from there because wood is its own type of structure and it's different. Okay? If you're a woody plant, you have special proteins that get secreted into the cell wall that essentially cement the cell walls together. Right? So it's like, if you look at it kind of at a cellular level, it looks like a wall made of bricks. Okay? The bricks are laid on top of each other, but they're cemented together with mortar. Right? That's what wood is like. It's cell walls, but they're put into a matrix, okay, that cements them together, and that makes them stronger, and they don't need the turgor pressure. That's why a tree can stay standing even after it's dead. Okay? It doesn't need the water vacuoles to support it. Okay, so water vacuoles are important, cell walls are important, okay, chloroplasts, those are all different. Plant or animals are not going to have any of those structures, but they are going to share a lot of the other stuff. Okay, another one that animal cells have that plant cells don't, and it's not labeled on that one, but it is labeled on our other one here, are centrioles. Okay? And centrioles are these little tiny organelles that usually hang out near the nucleus, and they help with cell division. Okay? Plants don't need them because the shape of a plant cell doesn't usually change. So when the cell divides, all the DNA gets to the two sides of the cell safely. But because an animal cell could change shape during the division process, the centrioles make sure that all the DNA that is necessary for each cell to have is guaranteed to get to each side. They send out little fibers that attach to your chromosomes and effectively pull them apart during the cell division process, okay, to ensure that that happens even if the cell changes shape while it's going on. Right? So plant cells don't have those because they really don't need them. All right, these are the centrioles right here. Okay? They look like kind of little gears almost. Okay? All right, so plants and animals have lots of similarities. Okay? Most of them come in the areas of intracellular transport and waste excretion. Okay? So the way that plants and animals transport material within the cell is essentially the same. Okay? How they get rid of wastes is essentially the same. Right? How they burn their sugar is essentially the same. They're for all intents and purposes identical. There aren't any differences in those processes. All that's different is how we get to glucose and in any other changes necessary to support that process. Okay. All right, we talked about this already. We talked about it in Unit 1, but it's a theme that comes up often, okay, and that is that plants and animals very likely had a common ancestor in the very distant past. We're talking like 3 billion years ago when life first appeared on Earth. Okay. You know, that organism probably had some animal and some plant-like characteristics, and then as you know, evolution takes place, there's a divergence usually that happens that produces more diversity. Carson, you have a question? Okay. All right. Okay, I would like you guys to answer those questions right now, and I will go and run and get our cell diagrams off the photocopier. All right, let's have a quick look at these. So, what's the main reason for the differences between plant and animal cells? 3 words. Modes of nutrition. Okay, their modes of nutrition are different. How they get their energy to glucose is different. Okay, number 2, what organelle supplies plants with energy? What process does it use? Chloroplasts, and they use photosynthesis. Okay, same question, but for animals. Right, Lysosomes that contain digestive enzymes that chemically break down food. Okay, question number 4, again, we've talked about several times here. Transport within plant and animal cells is done in the same fashion. They use the same processes, diffusion, osmosis, active transport, all of those things are the same. Okay, why would they have been kept the same, evolutionarily speaking, when so many other things have been altered? So why would plants and animals and fungi and protists and basically all branches of life use the same processes for transport? They shared a common ancestor is one part of that answer. Okay? They would have evolved and kept those, but why would they have kept them? Yes, they had a common ancestor that had them. So they can what? Okay, a little bit. More along the lines of how natural selection works. Okay? Natural selection says if something works, it's passed on genetically to your offspring. Okay? If you have a mutation of some kind that is better, you will survive and you will pass your genes on to your offspring and they will all have that same mutation. And if it makes the species stronger, pretty soon those without it disappear because those with it reproduce more often. Okay? That's the process of evolution. Over the course of many years, that process changes a species from one to another, okay, over the course of many years. 99.9% of all mutations are bad, okay, and as a result, the organisms usually don't compete as well, and those genetic mutations are not passed on. But in the cases where they are good and make that organism stronger, they are passed on, okay, and pretty soon you see that in all those organisms, right? So for example, if we had a wolf that was born with the ability to see perfectly at night, okay, that would certainly be something that would be advantageous over every other wolf not being able to do that. Okay, that wolf would then be able to hunt day and night, which would make it stronger. It would then get to mate more often because it's stronger, and that's how nature works. Okay, you reproduce more often, you have more offspring that are also strong. They reproduce more often. Pretty soon, all wolves can see at night. Okay, that's how that process works. So if this process has not changed, it's because it still works, and nothing better has come along. Okay, that's how natural selection works. It lives by the axiom, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, so that's how that works. All right, and number 5, the nutritional needs of plants and animals are very different. Which would have survived best in a primordial, that's a very primitive Earth, like 3.5 billion years ago, okay, that had very little oxygen or organic material available? I mean, what would have showed up first on Earth? Photosynthetic organisms or organisms that had to consume other organisms for food? Photosynthetic, okay? If there's nothing else alive, you're not going to have any food. Okay, so obviously photosynthesis would have had to have been one of the earliest energy producing processes. Okay. All right, questions on any of those? All right, we'll start with the labeling. Make sure you got the animal cell. Okay. And we'll get as much of this done as we can, and what we don't finish today, we'll finish on Monday. All right, we'll start right here with this big orange sausage-looking thing, okay, at the top of the cell here, okay? The big orange sausage-looking thing, there's lots of them in the cell, okay? You got one here, you got another one here, this is one, they're just not cut away. These ones are cut away so you can see the inside, okay? There's going to be lots of those in a cell, and depending on the type of cell, there may be more or less of them. Muscle cells would have lots of these, okay? Because muscle cells need lots of nope, not fibers. They also need lots of energy. These are your mitochondria. They are the organelles that burn sugar and release its energy. That's where cell respiration takes place. So these are mitochondria. Mitochondria. Okay, and they burn sugar and release the energy. So if you ever get sick and you're running a fever, these things are working overtime and producing excess heat in your body. Because most of the things that make you sick want to live at 37 degrees Celsius. If you run a fever, it weakens them. Yeah. Okay? Running a fever usually weakens the things that are trying to make you sick. Okay? But I mean, that only works to a point, right? If your fever gets too high, it could kill you too. Or runs for too long, it isn't good for you. All right. Next thing, and this is the weirdest thing. It's on like every animal cell diagram, and it's in like practically no animal cells. And that's this thing here, the flagellum. Okay? If you are female, you have no flagellated cells. Okay? If you're male, you have one type of cell in your body with a tail on it. Okay? Sperm. Yeah. Okay? That you have only one flagellated cell. Okay? Almost no cells that are part of a multicellular organism's tissues have a tail because they don't move around. Okay? They have no need for mobility. Okay? So, yeah, I don't know why, but it's on every animal cell diagram, but almost no animal cells actually have one. Okay. The big purple thing in the middle, this line here is pointing at the outside of the big purple thing. So let's say, what's the big purple thing? The nucleus. All right, so let's label that. That's the middle line, nucleus. What would we call the thing that goes around the nucleus? Not cell membrane. Nuclear membrane, okay? Nuclear. And it is pronounced nuclear, okay? We are not Homer Simpson. It's not nuclear, okay? It's nuclear. Yeah. Huh? Yeah, there's a big joke in that. Someone said, and you know, you got to be careful with the nuclear reactor. And he goes, nuclear. It's pronounced nuclear, except it isn't. Okay, yeah. Okay, all right. Inside of the nucleus, there is another kind of central dark dot inside the nucleus. And this is called the nucleolus. Okay? And the nucleolus is kind of a librarian. Okay? No, really. Because the nucleus, and I know you've been told this and you've been told wrong, the nucleus is not the brain of the cell. Okay? I hate that. It's like triangles. Brain of the cell and the triangle for algebra are the two things that make me fly into a murderous rage. Okay? This is not the brain of the cell. Right? It is more like a library. Because a brain actively makes decisions and controls things and has cells of its own. This does not. Okay? All that your nucleus does is protects your DNA, which is all unraveled and everywhere in there. Okay? Imagine your nucleus is a library where someone has tipped over every single bookshelf. Okay? That's how organized your nucleus is. But it's okay. The nucleolus is brilliant. It can find pieces of information in that horrible mess easily. And what its job is to control protein synthesis. In other words, it finds the strands of your DNA that are the instructions for making certain things. Okay? If your cell says, your body signals the cells and says, we need to make adrenaline right now. Okay? It's the nucleolus that finds the part of your DNA that is the instructions for making adrenaline. It makes a copy of it, and it sends that copy out into the cell to be made. Okay? It never sends the original. It only sends copies. So its job is to copy DNA and send it out into the cell to enable the proteins to be produced. Okay? That's what the nucleolus does. All right? The nucleus just stores the DNA. It's the nucleolus that actually does anything inside of there. Right? So if you write brain of the cell as the function of the nucleus, I will give you a 0. Do not write brain of the cell. It's not a brain. Not a brain. Okay. Now, this kind of forked line here is pointing at all these little dots. Some of the little dots float free within the cell, within the cytoplasm, and some of them are attached to this blue stuff. Either way, they are all ribosomes. They are the things that take the copy of the DNA the nucleolus makes and turn it into protein. Okay? Ribosomes make protein. They're like a site foreman. Okay? They get the blueprint and they get the job done. They can read the instructions, they can make decisions on what's going to happen with that and get the stuff built. That's their job. Okay? All right. This blue stuff with the ribosomes all over it is called rough endoplasmic reticulum, which you can abbreviate ER, rough ER. Okay? rough endoplasmic reticulum. The rough endoplasmic reticulum transports proteins. That's why it's covered in ribosomes. Okay? The things that make protein are all over it, and it can transport the proteins they make quickly. Right? It has a few other jobs. Okay? It can help with a little bit of protein synthesis, a little bit of making hormones and things like that, but for the most part, it's just for transport. Okay? And of course, you can see that the nucleus is surrounded by it. That's where you find the most rough ERs, right next to the nucleus, which makes sense. We don't want the instructions for making proteins to have to travel very far before those instructions get carried out. Okay? We want it to be right next to the nucleus so that those things can happen right away. All right. Down below here, the outside of the cell would be the cell membrane. Okay? The cell membrane is like border security. Okay? Their job is to control what gets in and out of the cell. Right? Most things are refused entry into the cell because they're simply too big. Right? If there is something big that needs to come into the cell, the membrane actually has to envelop it in a process called phagocytosis. Okay? Envelop it and take it in that way. Some things can travel easily through the membrane, but some things that can do that, we don't want to have do that. So the cell membrane is selectively permeable, which means it can choose, essentially, not like a conscious choice, but a chemical choice, to allow some things in to the cell and some things not. Right? So it keeps stuff out for the most part. Okay, we'll talk about the rest of it on Monday.